Alabama Supreme Court Justice Roy Moore decided that he's going to flat out ignore the Supreme Court, which he's not allowed to do, and block gay marriage in his state, even though they said he cannot do that. So he went on CNN to defend this, and he made a bunch of ridiculous arguments in a debate with Chris Cuomo.
You created a constitutional amendment that by design discriminated against gay people. And now you are being told by the federal law that is wrong.
Again, that is a constitutional amendment, the Alabama Constitution, and it's clearly within the bounds of state law and federal law. Again, there is nothing in the Constitution about marriage. How can judges go in and define a word? They're doing exactly what they did in 1857.
They just did it in U.S. v. Windsor.
Scott.
They just looked at the Defense of Marriage Act and said you cannot define marriage as just between a man and a woman.
That was between Congress. It did not affect the state according to the ruling in Windsor.
But you can't say that the court hasn't spoken about it. It was the exact same issue. It just wasn't a state law, and that's why we're having the next case in June.
I can say the court spoke about it because they said this does not apply to the state. It applies to the federal law passed by Congress.
That's right, because of the specific issue before them. And now they're meeting again in June. And if June comes and they hold the same way, then what will you do?
Then I will do what the court should, or what court should have done under Dred Scott. If it's an unlawful mandate, you don't have to recognize it. You can recuse from the case.
So you can
dissent.
So if
you can dissent to the United States Supreme Court, just like you can dissent to anything else.
If the Supreme Court causes it to be stare decisis, and we both know what that means, the case is decided, and the law is that you cannot discriminate against people on the basis of their sexual orientation in marriage, you will
let me ask you
will have to follow it, will you?
Let me ask you this, Chris.
Yes, sir.
Would you have followed the order in Dred Scott saying that black people were property, or would you have followed the order in Plessy versus Ferguson, which said that separate but equal was the policy of the United States? Can you answer that, please?
Your job as Chief Justice is to administer the law. I am not the Chief Justice of Alabama. It's not my place to answer.
Well, I'm asking you, if you were Chief Justice of Alabama, would you follow Plessy versus Ferguson and Dred Scott when they were issued?
You follow
yes or no?
the law of the land. That is what our nation is based on. That's what our nation is based on.
You can't answer it, can you, Chris?
Here's why. You cannot duck your responsibilities by putting them on me, Your Honor. They didn't elect me to be Chief Justice.
I'm not ducking my responsibilities. I will follow the law, sir.
So you'll allow gay marriage when it goes forward if it happens in June?
I said I will follow the law.
That will be the law.
If I can't follow what the Supreme Court, says, I'll recuse from the case. But I'm telling you that you can't answer the question because you can't admit to yourself that Plessy versus Ferguson, separate but equal, and Dred Scott were wrong decisions and should not have been followed.
This guy's an idiot. In his own example, he's in the wrong. Now, I'm going to come back to that in a second, but first let me address something real quick. A lot of people in the liberal blogosphere are saying, oh, Chris Cuomo schooled this guy, he did a good job. I don't see it. Now, look, maybe at other parts, it's a long interview. It's like 25 minutes long. At certain parts, maybe he did a decent job. But in this main part here, where, this main chunk I showed you, where he makes his most ridiculous arguments, I don't think Chris Cuomo did a good job fighting back. So let's break this down a little bit. He keeps referencing Dred Scott, and he keeps referencing cases where they were horrible decisions. And what he's saying is, would you have followed these decisions where we all look back on them now and go, that's a pathetic decision, that's terrible. He's saying, would you follow that if you were around back then? And his point is, that's what I'm doing right now. I'm the virtuous person who's standing up, who would have stood up against slavery, and who today is standing up against gay marriage. So that's his comparison. His comparison is slavery to gay marriage. What an outrageous comparison! And that's what I needed Chris Cuomo to say. Say, whoa, wait. Did you really just compare slavery to gay marriage? Is that what you did? Now, the problem with Dred Scott and those court cases that he named is that they ruled against equality. And today, what is Roy Moore doing? Ruling against equality, which is why I say in his own example, he's in the wrong. No, the perfect case to compare with the gay rights case, which is in front of the court now, is Loving versus Virginia, because that's the case on interracial marriage. So essentially, the Supreme Court said in Loving versus Virginia, hey, all of the state-level bans on interracial marriage, they're all unconstitutional, and we're striking them down. Well, what Roy Moore is doing, if he was around back then, it would be the equivalent of saying, I don't care that the Supreme Court struck down the interracial marriage ban. I believe in my interracial marriage ban, so we gon' keep it. That's what you're doing. Just instead of interracial marriage, you're doing it with gay marriage. When the Supreme Court strikes it down, as they likely will, you're going to say, no, I'm going to stand up and I'm going to say we going to ban gay marriage still, even though we ain't allowed to. So that's the virtuous stand you're taking. It's the exact same as standing up against interracial marriage. It's not the same as like you're standing up against slavery. Don't be ridiculous. I mean, this guy is doing the equivalent of defying the interracial marriage case, and he's doing that with gay marriage. And another good comparison to what he's doing is Brown versus Board of Education, which overturned separate but equal. In that case, the states wanted to keep separate but equal. They said, no, we like this, we want to keep this. A lot of deeply conservative states said, we want separate but equal. We want segregation, we want it. And the Supreme Court said, bitch, not allowed to do it, gotta get rid of it. So what Roy Moore is doing is the equivalent of, I'm going to be virtuous and I'm going to stand up and say, we are keeping separate but equal. See, in his mind, he flips the virtuosity of it. You see what I mean? In his mind, he thinks the thing that is historically incorrect is the thing that's historically correct, and he thinks he's on the side of, being against slavery and doing the right thing. But no, you're the one that's the problem. You're the equivalent of George Wallace, who stood in the doorway when they desegregated the schools, and he said, I will not stand for this. We don't let no Negroes in here. I'm the virtuous person because I want to keep Negroes separate. And now history looks at you like a fucking joke because that's what you are. You're a dunce. You're unintelligent. You're not bright. You don't have a high IQ. You're a product of your own backwards culture. You haven't thought in any way philosophically, objectively, factually. You haven't bothered to try to look through the eyes of the people who are discriminated against. You just think, well, my mommy and daddy told me gays is bad, so I'll stand up against the Supreme Court and not let gays get married in my state. Oh, look at you. What a great guy you are. Telling gays to fuck off. How great you are. What a sick human being this guy is, man. The thing that pisses me off more with this guy than with anybody else who's anti-gay marriage is that, again, this guy in his own mind thinks he's a hero. This guy's comparing what he did to the idea of standing up against former Supreme Court decisions that, upheld slavery, upheld black people as property. You have it exactly backwards, buddy. And let me just give one more example, and then we'll wrap up this story. But I want to make sure that everybody understands this. So take the issue of free speech. Essentially, what this guy is doing is the equivalent of there used to be laws on the books in certain red states against free speech, essentially, where they banned curse words in certain situations and they banned saying certain things. And what Roy Moore is doing is the equivalent of Supreme Court cases on those laws that strike down those laws, right? He's standing up and saying, no, I'm gonna continue to fight to allow the state to ban the word fuck and other obscenities. See what I mean? He's fighting for states' rights, even when the so-called states' rights in question really are violating other people's rights. And that's what he totally misses. He misses the idea that the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, if you go strictly by the letter of the law, right, and protecting people equally under the law, if you go by that, it's easy to interpret it as, well, of course, if gay people want to get married, why should we withhold Social Security benefits from them, tax rights from them, inheritance rights from them? Why should we treat them fundamentally different under the law? Why should we treat them fundamentally unequal under the law? He just rejects that argument out of hand. No, It doesn't apply to gay people because I say so. Even if the Supreme Court says it does apply to gay people, I'm going to say it doesn't apply to gay people because I'm just that dumb.